Cori Arnold, welcome to the Be Real podcast. Appreciate you taking the opportunity, some time out of your weekend to actually join to kind of like talk about yourself, your book, in today's time, considering that everything that's going on in regards to the economy, people, the news media telling us that the economy is great, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure people are actually feeling something different. And then when you look at the numbers, credit card, debt highest it's ever been. Interest rates on credit cards highest they ever been. When you look at delinquency rates, for auto, credit cards, housing, what I mean, that's going up. But then you look at everything else. When you look at debt to income ratio, that's trending down. So it seems like that's happening, but it's like it's conflicting to a certain degree. And so with people actually going through that and experiencing that and probably having this insurmountable amount of debt and them not really knowing because of our educational system doesn't really show you how to manage debt or how to prevent yourself from getting into it in the first place. And I think now is the ideal time, especially for somebody that like you, who not only has written a book on how to tackle mounting debt, but actually has also went through that experience. And now you're actually on the outside, being a model where people can look at you and it's like you're not only writing about it, you actually did it. And so if you could just kind of start off, introduce yourself, and then we'll just kind of get into some questions for you.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for having me. It's I really enjoy talking about money and just sharing my story. Hopefully I can inspire at least one person through this interview. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. So about 13 years ago, I finally realized that, my debt had come to the point that I had to do something. I had about 260,000 in total. 22,000 was credit cards, 140,000 was student loans, and then I had some real estate for 98,000. And I was a mess basically. I had a good job. I had my MBA. I thought I was like getting there from a career standpoint, but I realized that my income, even though it kept growing, I was getting nowhere financially. So my net worth actually was not. It was getting deeper and deeper. And at the worst, it was negative $99,000. So it was pretty ugly for a long time. And that's kind of the backstory. And then, so like you mentioned, I did turn it around. I paid off that debt in 5 years. And then in 5 more years, I became a millionaire. So I really committed to changing my life. And I didn't actually realize it would turn out this way. But I really just wanted to pay that debt off. But it turned out very well.
Got more than what you bargained for.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So in your book, you share your experience of overcoming like significant debt. So can you kind of walk through us the pivotal moments that actually led you to take control of your finances?
Yeah, yeah. So I mentioned like 13 years ago, there were two, for me, there were two really big turning points. And it's funny, I hear this a lot when I hear people talking about their debt and like how they actually, what happened to get them through that hump. Because for a lot of people, it feels like you're way down here because you finally realize, oh my gosh, like what have I done? I've made all these bad decisions. So the first turning point for me was I was actually watching a Susie Orman special, and if you don't know who she is, she's a financial expert. Yeah, so she had a woman on stage, and this woman also had spending issues just like I did. And she brought out a rack of this woman's clothes, which was supposedly worth like $6,500. And then she brought out a table with a pile of cash on it, which was $6,500 worth of cash. And she asked the woman like a very simple question, would you rather have the cash or the clothes? And like, finally, like a light bulb just switched. It's such a simple question, but I had been spending like basically my hobby was shopping, and I would just go on the weekends and buy some clothes, shoes, whatever it was, random stuff. And I finally realized that that stuff, those clothes, those weren't actually like going to build any security for me. I couldn't really resell them for food in the future or shelter. But cash, if I had cash or assets, that would really change my life. So that was kind of just for me, it was just like a switch in my head that really helped me start to think about money differently.
Yeah.
And then the more tangible, issue, or I guess turning point was, I had been, I mentioned I got my MBA, so I thought I was really good at finance, and I had
Uh-huh.
been like measuring my net worth. So, your assets less your liabilities. And I knew it was negative, but I thought, I'm in like school right now. It's okay. It's going to get better as I get a job and or a better job. And so I knew my debt was bad. But the one thing I finally did was I actually calculated the annual interest on my debt. So it's a very easy calculation. You just take your interest rate times your debt balance, and you get your approximate annual interest expense. And for me, this was almost $16,000, which was huge because my take-home pay at the time was like 48,000. So basically
Wow.
$1, yeah, out of every $3 of my paycheck was going toward interest. And when it goes toward interest, you're literally just paying your lenders. You're not paying down your debt. It's literally just throwing money away. And for me, like I was like sick, that I almost needed that. It was horrible, but I needed it to really like commit to this whole debt payoff journey.
Yeah. So in my mind, so that's what you having that knowledge base and actually being able to understand that aspect of it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people in society that don't actually have, that knowledge to
Hmm.
really sit down and assess their financial situation and understand the implications associated with having high amounts of debt at high interest rates. And
Hmm.
so taking that into consideration, it's like what could somebody who's not as financially savvy, what I mean,
Yeah.
as you
Hmm.
are,
Yeah.
to really understand, from on a basic level, what would you
Agreed.
advise?
Yeah, I mean, so the first step, which really could be the hardest step for people, is actually just getting organized. So finding all your statements, opening your statements, because as you know, like money is a very emotional topic, and a lot of people would rather just kind of live with the uncertainty of not really knowing what that total balance is because it's scary. And the thing about that is that uncertainty is actually probably driving a lot more stress than really just knowing the numbers. So that's my encouragement to everyone to just, if you think you're in a lot of debt or if you get to the point you can barely afford your payments, it's time to list it all out, get organized. You can do it in a spreadsheet, you can do it on paper. The key is to list it out and get organized. And then the cool thing, of course, like that formula isn't too complicated, but you're right. Like if you don't really understand finance, you're not going to know that formula. But I would definitely try to calculate that. And if you want to even make it easier, there are a ton of debt calculators out on sites. If you just Google debt calculator, you can find all kinds of calculators out there. So I would highly recommend that just to get started. But it's as simple as listing it out and getting organized.
All right. So reflecting on your journey as well. So what are some common financial mistakes you made, and how can you help others
Yeah.
avoid? We
And
all make
actually,
mistakes on our journey, right?
this is the reason that I decided to share my story because I want people to know that I'm just a normal person. I made a ton of mistakes, just like everyone else. We all make mistakes, and that's the cool part of life. You can make mistakes, you can have failures, and it's all about how you react to those mistakes or failures that really determines where you go. So for me, I did a few things. So undergrad and my MBA program, I just chose two expensive schools where in both cases I had options for cheaper schools with like full rides.
Okay.
I know, and looking back, like it seems so stupid. Why
What
did I
was
make
I
those?
doing?
I know, I know. My MBA was my dream school, and I was again emotions. Emotions are so powerful, and I had those two choices, and I made the wrong. I mean, I don't regret it. By the way, I don't regret it because I'm at this point now. But it made it much harder. It made life much harder because I had to pay that debt off for it took about 5 years. That was one huge mistake. So if you're at the point where you're trying to look at schools, um, go for the cheaper option. Go for the option that is going to, potentially pay for some of your tuition. No one cares about where you went to school as long as you've got the degree and you have the right communication skills. That's really what matters. That was a big mistake. Another mistake I made was I when I first started this, had just started at a new employer, and I had about $29,000 in a former employer's 401k. And I decided, I'm going to give myself a big head start and I'm going to withdraw that and I'm going to pay off a student loan. I think the first student loan was like 42,000, it was something ridiculous. And so I did it. And the thing is, after taxes and penalties, I only got like 24,000, I think, around there. So I mean, it helped me get a big dent into the debt at the very beginning, which was motivating. But at the same time, like that little account would have been huge. Like, that would be a very healthy six figures today. So I wish I wouldn't have done that. And I know all of the financial experts say don't touch your retirement accounts, and they are right.
Yeah.
So I don't recommend that anyone does that. Um, those are just a couple, but I mean, I made a ton of mistakes. And I think I actually go into probably more detail in the book. Just little things, even my mindset and like decisions that I made. I think back now and I'm like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
But that's okay. We
Yeah.
all learn.
It's strong for everybody. So speaking on the emotional side, so how did
Mhm.
you manage the emotional challenges during your transformation, and what strategies do you suggest for others?
Yeah, and like I mentioned, obviously we all know money elicits emotions. We make so many decisions, and a lot of our bad decisions are probably because of our emotions. For me, I'll tell you, I was progressing a lot in my career, so I was doing pretty well there. But I realized, all of my coworkers and colleagues that were also probably doing well, they were still enjoying life and they were still doing what they wanted and still going out to eat, where I had to really cut back. Like I actually went very, very extreme. And you don't necessarily have to go as extreme as me, but I really wanted to get this. I was so like determined, to get this debt gone. So I basically stopped eating out. I cut back on like my utility bills, so I made sure all the lights were off. I didn't do too much air conditioning in the summer, too much heat in the winter. There's a funny example. Well, yeah, a funny example about one of my friends, or actually a roommate. She had left a Keurig machine, and I realized I was spending like $10 a week on Keurig cups, which isn't a big deal probably, but it is $500 a year. So I donated that Keurig machine and then saved that 500 bucks. So again, it's not a lot of money, but if I found ten little savings like that, that's 5 grand a year that I could save and put toward the debt. So for me, I got like a confidence hit emotionally because I realized like I couldn't live the way I'd been living. I couldn't just get everything I wanted, even though I felt like I was working hard and I felt like I deserved it. Luckily, I got past that attitude. So I do tell any of your listeners or viewers that it's not easy. It's hard. It definitely was a confidence hit, especially seeing everyone else just living life, being normal. But I'm very, very, very thankful that I took the sacrifice. I let my confidence get a little hit. It's back. It's okay.
Yeah.
um, so I definitely recommend, going through the hard because it gets a lot easier if you can take those sacrifices for the short
Yeah.
term.
Yeah, and I hear you, and it's like, and I agree because in my mind, that the emotional piece and what we see, because
Hmm.
typically what we see in other people's lives is just like a veneer of their lives, and we automatically make a lot of assumptions, and we see people doing a lot of things that we want to do, and so if we're in this journey of trying to rid ourselves of all this debt. But at the same time, you see somebody going on trips or buying certain cars, doing certain things. You're having this internal conflict
Hmm.
with wanting to keep up with your peer group, not realizing that, hey, that's a veneer. They may be struggling as well. You know what I mean? So that can
Exactly.
add, in my mind, an element of challenge to anybody's journey on, eliminating any type debt, in my mind. Yeah. So next question for you. So what are your thoughts on popular debt payoff methods? You have the Avalanche method, the debt snowball, those different types. And so what are your methods do you use to pay off your debts, and why would you consider them to be effective?
Sure. Yeah. So those are the two most popular. So I'll just describe them real quickly. And by the way, I recommend both of them. It's really dependent on the situation and the person. The debt snowball. So Dave Ramsey coined the debt snowball. Um, basically you list all of your debts from smallest balance to largest balance, and you start with that smallest balance. The reason that it works so well is because it gives you a quick win. So maybe you have a credit card that only has like a $300 balance or $800, and you could pay it off in maybe 2 months or even less. And getting that quick win of saying like, you check that box, you got rid of that account, now you have 8 accounts left or whatever you have. That is very motivating. That gives you confidence. Quick small wins, even if they're small, they give you confidence, and that's what you need, because when you look at all of your money or all of your debt, it can be very very overwhelming. So dividing it up into small goals can be very very motivational. um, on the other side, there's the debt avalanche, and that is where you take all of your debts and you list them from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate, and you pay off that highest interest rate first. Now, I'll admit that I am a numbers nerd, so I knew. Yeah, so I knew that attacking those ones with the highest interest rate was going to get me out of debt the fastest. So I ended up taking that route, and I also did some things along the way to really cut my interest rates. So again, like if you're really a math nerd like me, then maybe that's your best bet, because you're really chopping away at the most expensive debt first. Um, but again, both methods have their advantages, and you just have to choose one that works for you, and that's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. So, what are your thoughts? I know you mentioned investing, for retirement. So, in your mind, it's like, should people invest, while they're in debt, or is it better to focus solely on paying off the debt? And how did you actually approach this in your own, personal journey?
Yeah. Yep. This is a great question. And it's funny. So by the way, I'm a fan of Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman, and they both have very different views on this. And I tend to go with Susie a little bit more. So what I did personally, I had started a new job in 2011, and this whole process, I guess, adventure, whatever you want to call it, it started toward the end of 2011, 2012. So when I started at the new job, I decided just to contribute 10% of my salary to my retirement fund. Um, and my company, they match 6%. So the 6% that I was contributing was getting a 6% match. So that's 100% return. And I have not seen a stock market ever return 100% in a year. Even though I love, love, love the stock market, 100% return is almost unheard of. Obviously, some stocks will return 100% over years, but generally not within a year. So I would actually recommend that people go ahead and set up your retirement. At least get the company match. Generally, it's between 6 to like 10, 12% to get the full match. And then after it's set up, don't even think about it. Like, pay off your debt, focus on your debt. Because the other argument is, hey, you should really focus on one thing at a time. Um, but for me, because I did that and because it took so long to get my debt paid off, 5 years, I actually had over 100,000 in that retirement account when I finally got out of debt, which was actually like six years of investing into it. So the cool thing was, after I paid off my debt, I wasn't actually starting at zero. I had a nice little balance in my retirement account that really helped push me toward that millionaire status. Um, so for me, I would actually do both. Now, I would not do any non-retirement investing. So I would not have a brokerage account. I would not do 529 for a child. Um, no investing in your HSA, anything like that. I would just simply focus on that retirement, and while you're in debt. And again, I would set it up once. I would not focus. I wouldn't even look at it until your debt was paid off. Um, that would probably be the best strategy. And then just really focus on getting out of debt, is what I would do.
Okay. All right. So speaking of, so that's investing. So how did you prioritize saving like for emergencies versus paying off debt? And what advice do you have for others facing like this dilemma? All right. Because we all,
Yeah. So again, I don't necessarily like have the same advice as some of the people I look up to, but for me, I kept my emergency fund very, very low. And I wouldn't even call it an emergency fund. Basically, what was left in my checking account, the residual balance, which got very low. I mean, I don't exactly remember how low it got, but I'm sure I got it down to like $100, because I was so focused on paying every dollar I could toward that debt to minimize the interest. Um, I don't necessarily recommend that to everyone. I was single at the time, no kids, so I had some flexibility. I had a credit card. If something really wrong happened, you know, I had plenty of like credit line to fall on. I know that's not necessarily recommended. I know other people don't necessarily agree with that, but I just knew the power of every dollar and minimizing that principal balance would obviously get me out of debt faster. Now, obviously, now that I am debt free, I have about 6 months of cash on hand. Um, so I think I'm a big proponent of an emergency fund. But while you're getting out of debt, I think you have to be a little creative. And maybe not that credit cards can be actually a good tool, but the me that was like 15 years ago, I didn't use them as a tool. I just used them as kind of a crutch and extra income, which was, my mindset was very off. Um, so if you can get to the point where you're disciplined and you really just see it as a tool that can be used sporadically and not just continue to swipe it, then that's the best way to go, to use it wisely. And then once you pay off your debt, then you've got time to actually build up a decent fund.
Perfect. So you mentioned budgeting. So establishing a budget, right, is often seen as restrictive. It's like, right, I have to kind of keep myself within these boundaries for spending on this, especially if up to a certain point you've gotten used to spending a certain way. So how did you create a budgeting system that was both, realistic, sustainable during your debt repayment phase?
Yeah. Yes, that's a good question. So I will admit I'm very stubborn, and if someone told me I had to create a budget, I'm probably going to say no. And I think a lot of people are that way. If you don't understand why you're going to do something, then why would you do it, right? Why would you do a harder habit if you don't need to? So I totally agree. A lot of people do see it as a constraint. They see it as being controlled. Um, but I would like to flip that, because what actually helped me was, hey, I have bigger goals. Like, I want to pay off this debt and I want to retire early and I want to do all these other things. But if my money is a mess, I can't do any of those bigger goals. So, for example, if your goal is to pay off your debt, you have a budget, and that is a tool. You can get really lean on your expenses and pay more debt off faster, or you can continue to spend high and then it'll just take double the time maybe to pay off your debt. um, and I think having the bigger goal, that actually is a great reason to budget. I think if you just throw a budget on someone, even if they have the power to create the budget and to decide how much they're going to put in each line item or each category, it's going to be very difficult for them. But if they have a bigger why or a bigger goal, um, then it's so much more easy to do, because at, that is why I went so lean. Because I wanted to get out of the debt so fast. And it still took me 5 years, which is crazy. But it's all about balance in your life and what you want more than, it's all about prioritizing, I guess. Yeah,
That why, right?
exactly.
All right. So, in your mind, so how can individuals build confidence and take control of their money even when starting from like a negative position?
Yeah, and I will tell you it's hard. I know I've already said that. It's not easy, especially if you've been avoiding your money, not opening statements, you don't really know where you are. That first step is difficult, but I highly, highly encourage you to get organized. Even if it's on a notebook, who cares? Just write it down. Write down your balance, your interest rates, your minimum monthly payment, and then for a bonus, just another column over to the right, multiply your interest rate times your balance, each debt balance. And then if you add those all up, you'll get your rough annual interest expense. And that, I mean, that is eye opening. Hopefully, you don't have anywhere near as much debt as I had. And hopefully, your interest expense isn't that big of a deal. But that's really the key. Even if you don't have the confidence, I will tell you it is a big even if you're very overwhelmed and there's lots of uncertainty, the only way to really get past that is to take action. The more you wait, the more you think about it, the worse it gets in your head, and it might not actually be as bad as you think it is. So I would highly, highly encourage you just to get organized, write it down. I always talk about tracking your money, and some people don't really believe the power of actually tracking it, but there is power there.
So you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast how you started your journey when you were single, right? Which is makes it easier because you don't have another component if you're actually in a relationship. So taking that into consideration and the stresses or if you're not aligned perfectly, that can add another dynamic, to a relationship. And I don't know the divorce statistics, but I think that maybe that's one of the top ones as far as finances, the reason people get divorced. And so, taking that into considerations, why is it so important for couples to have open and honest conversations about money? And what tips do you have for starting those conversations?
Yeah, this is a funny story. So I actually met my partner. I think I was a year into this journey, and I had to confess basically that I had all this debt. And I remember the restaurant we were sitting in. I remember like I remember thinking, "Ah, this is the end." But it was a hard conversation, and but it was fine. It was fine because it wasn't like I'm in this debt and I'm staying here. I'm in this debt. I made a mess. I admitted it, and this is where I'm going to be hopefully in a few years. So I think it's all about attitude because everyone makes mistakes. And I think when you start dating someone, you do need to have these conversations, and they need to be frequent because things change. Our visions for the future change. Our maybe even our perception of money, our beliefs around money. So I would highly suggest that before you get too committed to someone, really have those conversations up front because you're right. Money is one of the top reasons for divorce and breakups, and you don't want to be a statistic. You want to find the right person up front because money money can be a very big issue if even if you're just dating someone and you start to live together, you buy a house together, it can get very, very messy. So I would definitely, the sooner you can talk about it and the more often, like maybe not every day, but maybe once a month, once a quarter, you really talk about kind of where you are and desires, priorities, things like that. Definitely. And by the way, a red flag is if the person isn't willing to talk about it, then it's probably a big red flag that you may not want to pursue.
That's good. Good intel. So taking that into consideration, so you're having that discussion at the beginning of the relationship. Both of you will agree. It's like, hey, it's okay, not a problem. You get into that relationship, and it's serious now. You're married, and so what happens when it comes to determining whose debt to tackle first? Should you work
Yes.
together, or should how does that dynamic play out?
Yeah, and again, this probably depends on if you decide to get married or you're dating. It probably depends on what stage you're at, but I would actually, instead of worrying about, well, it kind of, okay, there's a few things, factors. First of all, you have to decide, are you going to keep your money separate or combine it? And for me and my partner, we decided to keep our money separate. It works perfect for us, yeah. But I know it's very popular to combine your money, and there's lots of, I think, research about how, the teamwork aspect and the accountability partner. I think that part of it is powerful as well. Um, let's see.
Is there
Sorry,
one
I
that
lost.
you recommend? Is there one that you'd actually
Yeah,
recommend?
yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Oh, yeah,
sorry. I lost my train of thought.
yeah.
Yeah. So, actually, instead of worrying about like, especially if you combine your money, instead of worrying about whose is going first, I would actually go back to the snowball and the avalanche. Decide together what strategy you're going to pursue, and then based on that, then you've got to list your debts. Again, it doesn't really depend or matter whose it is,
Yeah.
assuming that you're in a committed relationship.
Yeah.
You know, then I think it's fine. Just pick a strategy and go with that.
And then what about in situations where there's like a significant disparity in income between the two
Yeah.
partners? How can
Yeah.
couples maintain that financial equality and avoid, any type of resentment that they may get because it's like, hey, I'm making a lot more than you. You have more debt than me. I'm having to give you a lot of my money to pay off. You know what I mean? What's does that look like?
Yeah, agreed. Again, this comes down to whether you combine your money or keep it separate. One thing that I've been taught, and this is only for common bills, not necessarily for debt, but for common bills like household items, things like that. If someone's making 30,000 and the other person's making 70, together they make 100. The person making 30 should contribute 30% of the common bills. Um, and then the other person would contribute 70. That seems like an equitable way to do it. Now, if you're married and you combine your finances, that's totally different. You're one team at that point, and then you just need to pay off the debts as they are. And it doesn't necessarily matter like who's making what because it's all going into one bank account. Um, and maybe the person making more, maybe maybe they're fun uh FUND, so fun and then fund. Uh, they are, maybe they get if they feel like they need a little extra spending money, maybe you do something like that to give them a little incentive for making more income. But again, that totally comes down to the couple, to the attitudes, to the personalities. That's probably um, a very customized process for people.
So now jumping into like goals and shared goals. So how can couples effectively save for large shared goals like buying a house or planning a wedding without sacrificing their individual priorities?
Yeah. And again, this comes down to your budget. So, especially if you're a couple and you do have some large purchases, this is where talking about your money once a month or your vision for the future is very, very important because as obviously, you get together, you start talking about things you want, like a house, maybe you want to start a family. Um, uh, you have expectations. You talk through it, then you both kind of go kind of live life, and then all of a sudden maybe in 2 months, one of you decides, I would actually rather have this priority than that priority. And that's where these like monthly, or even if it's more often than that, conversations need to happen because all of us are human, we all change our minds over time. And that's why ongoing communication about money, and again, like every conversation doesn't have to be formal. It can be informal. It can be like, oh, this would be really cool. And it can, and this is kind of how we do it. And then as things change, you prioritize differently. But obviously, having two people as part of it, it can be a little harder, especially if you've got one who really, really strongly has a priority of a, and then the other one maybe had that priority and now they've changed their their minds a little bit. It might take some compromise, but I mean that's really what a relationship. There's compromise. I feel like in most parts of a relationship. And as long as you love that person and you know that the long-term plan, really the long-term vision is similar, then it's worth it. Obviously we can't, even if we were just making choices on our own, we can't have everything we want on one day. We have to plan it, we have to save up the cash for it, and then do it over time based on our priorities. So I agree, it is a little challenging when you have two people with two different priorities potentially, but that's where that ongoing communication hopefully can help. Um, yeah.
Perfect. All right. So we talked about money being a big potential conflict initiator in relationships. And you mentioned, having those discussions on a monthly, quarterly basis to discuss finances. And so what are some, other than that, are there any other practical strategies that couples can use to navigate through financial disagreements when they come up?
Yeah, I think a budget is really good. It is a bit harder when you have two people creating one budget. um, but I think that helps because basically when you agree on the budget, you've kind of set certain things. And so for example, 10% of the budget is going to the house fund. Well, if down the line someone decides, I'd rather get this new car first than we buy our house, then it's not necessarily in the budget. So it's then you can come back to that, you can readjust the budget if you need to. And maybe again, maybe it's like once a month, it's not only a conversation, but it's actually like a meeting about the budget, which I know doesn't sound very fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey,
but
honey,
it's good.
it's
Exactly. Let's look at the spreadsheet together. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I know that doesn't probably sound that great, but it's really just staying on the same page because again, we're all human. As we live life, things change. We see different things. Our beliefs change. Our priorities change. So trying to stay on a similar page um,
yeah.
throughout versus just like talking about once a year, that's when it kind of gets you in trouble.
And so taking that into consideration, so having those normal discussions and in regards, you talked about that being the opportunity to make sure that you're bringing up goals and those goals are actually aligned. Is there anything else they can do to ensure that they're actually working toward like a shared vision for their future, or is or have
Yeah, I mean, it's understanding what the goals are. If and the assuming that the goals align with their values, so I assume that if you've made it to a committed relationship, that you hopefully have found a person that you have similar values with. Um, and because yeah, I mean, that's not necessarily that's kind of a vague strategy, but obviously you want to get the right person. And then if you realize that, the visions aren't the same, you're going kind of separate ways, maybe yeah, maybe it's time for counseling or something.
hey, because people change, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Unfortunately, yeah, which can be
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
We're all dynamic. And so what's your perspective on prenuptial agreements and how can couples maintain transparency about their finance and without creating tension? Potential.
Yeah. Yeah, funny. I think I'm probably gonna have the opposite feedback that probably the majority of people have. I actually think they're great, and I think they actually avoid issues in the future. And I know, there's a lot of people out there that really think that, oh, if they need a prenuptial, they don't trust me. But it's actually the opposite. If you feel like you need, or if you feel like um, you don't need a prenuptial, then maybe there is some weird incentive that you have underneath, because why would you care if the other person has a prenuptial, if there's no plan, to disrupt the relationship. So for me, I think it's good. It's protection. Obviously you hope that it never comes up and you never have to worry about it. That's the goal, but it's good. It's just like insurance. I think we all need to protect ourselves until we're, absolutely, absolutely sure that we can trust the other person.
Certainly, certainly. And so, for couples with children, how can they work together to instill healthy financial habits and teach money management skills to their kids?
Hmm. Yeah, it comes down to communication. You need to be open to your kids about money, and you don't have to necessarily tell them how much you make or how much you have, but you need to talk about money, and you need to talk about how you earn money and how much groceries cost, and how much it costs to keep the electric on or to keep their phones running on the internet or something like that. They need to be aware that things cost money. One thing my parents did really well, they gave us an allowance. And we had a very, I don't know if this is just because, again, I was kind of like an organized kid, or maybe I got it from one of them. But we had a list of chores that we could do, and each chore had a monetary value. Like, a load of laundry was a quarter. We weren't getting rich by any means, but, and we had a limit every week we could make $5. And I remember strategizing, I went to the chores that made the most. So I had to do less chores. I just had to do the harder chores. Um, so, for that really instilled in me that, work actually produces income, which is nice. And now today that value or that belief has really done well for me. Because I work hard and I get paid for that. So for me, like, I think giving them an allowance, again, I don't know at what age you start. I don't personally have children, so I don't know at what age you start. I have a niece and nephew which are getting their allowance, but um, the sooner the better. Just again, don't avoid talking about money. You don't have to give the true numbers to scare them or anything, but it's more just the openness about the topic. I think that helps quite a bit.
I agree. I believe that's extremely, yeah, important because they're not getting it anywhere else, unfortunately,
Exactly.
as our education system. So so you now you're in a relationship, you have your significant other, all debts paid for, and now, you're talking about retirement. So what does that typically look like from a relationships perspective? Are you maxing out your 401ks and your IRAs and different things like that? And are you working on it together? If this person has a low income and they can't max theirs out, what does that look like in your mind?
Yeah, this is again, this depends on probably how long you've been together. Newer relationships, maybe not so much, but if you've been with this person, for 20 years, then I would look at everything as one pot. And yeah, like you said, you've paid off your debt, you're contributing to your retirement. What I would do is once your debt is paid off, you should have a really good understanding of what your annual expenses are. And I'm just going to give you a number just for ease of calculations. But let's just say you figure out that your annual expenses are $40,000 a year. There's an easy way to calculate your financial freedom number, and you just take the annual expenses, so 40,000 divided by 4%, and that will give you your number. So that, again, I did an easy number, so that's $1 million. Um, so if that's your expenses, and not just today's expenses, that's what you think you'll pay in the future. Because again, remember, there's other things that come up, like health insurance if you retire before, I think, 62. So there's other things that you have to think about. If you decide you want to travel more, for example, when you're retired, you've got to add that to your current expenses. There's some inflation that could happen. There's income taxes, things like that. So understanding that number and having that goal together. Again, let's just say the goal is $1 million. When you work to that together, even though maybe one person has a lot more in their 401k and this person has a little IRA, again, it's looking at the whole pot and making sure that it covers your annual expenses. Um, the other thing, I wouldn't necessarily like, I would max out retirement for a few years, but once you actually start getting closer to that retirement age, if it's younger than 59 and a half, you'll want to make sure you have some money in like a discount brokerage account, even a high yield savings account, because you can't necessarily get to the 401k or the IRAs early. There are a couple exceptions to that. So a Roth IRA, you can actually get anything you've contributed to the Roth um, back without any taxes or penalties, which is great. The other thing you can do, which I'm actually personally looking into this one right now, it's called SEP. It's SEPP, and I don't exactly know what it stands for. It's something like substantially equal periodic payments. I think that's what it is. And basically, you can actually get your 401k early without penalties. But the deal is you have to take a similar, so basically a consistent payment every single year until you're 59 and a half. So understanding what that number is very important. Um, and I'm most likely going to use that, by the way. When I do decide to retire, that's probably my strategy right there, because that's income that I can count on every single month until I'm 59 and a half. And then at 59 and a half, then I'll have access to a lot more money. Um, but thinking about retirement and understanding, the age you want to retire, the amount you need, that will actually help you decide like where you want to invest or contribute the most during those years.
All right, perfect, perfect. Thank you. All right, so now as just kind of working towards the end, I know you mentioned some of this at the beginning of the podcast, but just to kind of keep it fresh on people's mind as we kind of work towards the end. So again, so what are some of the key components to creating a path towards financial independence, especially for those currently in debt? If you could just maybe just overall like a high level summary of that.
Yeah, sounds good. So actually in my book, I kind of talk about these five pillars. The first is mindset, and like you said, we talked about mindset, but um, if you want to make any progress financially, you really have to start questioning some of your beliefs. We all have these beliefs. Um, for example, I believed that millionaires, I didn't actually believe this, but a lot of people believe that most millionaires inherited their money, or or you're going to have a car loan the rest of your life, or something like that, or you're going to work for the rest of your life. If you believe those things, then you're probably not going to give much effort into becoming financially free. So you really have to start questioning your beliefs and your mindset around money. And it's okay. The thing is though, it's harder than it seems, because a lot of those beliefs, they're actually like facts in our brain. We don't actually see them as beliefs because we know these things. You know, we know that we're gonna have to work forever. We don't really question it. So it's almost taking like, take 15 minutes to really kind of think about what you think about and what you think are facts, because some of those things just might not be true. So that's number one. Number two is, yeah, you've got to pay off your debt. I cannot put into words like what a burden lifted when I finally paid off that debt. And again, it took 5 years. It was not easy. They were long years, but it was totally, totally, totally worth it. So, do what you can, create a plan, get out of debt, pay that off. If you have to work a part-time job, do it. I worked at Lowe's, the retail store, 20 hours every weekend. It was not my favorite, but I had less time to shop
Yeah.
and, to spend money. And I was making, I wasn't making that much, maybe $10 or $11 an hour, but it was good for me. And I did that for a while. Um, so pay off your debt, even if it means getting another job, sacrificing some spending in the short term. Again, it's worth it. And then number three, we talked about this earlier. Invest in your retirement. Do that as soon as you can. Like if you're currently not investing, go sign up with your employer this week. Number four, pay off your house. So again, like when I was talking about debt earlier, I'm mostly talking about consumer debt, so credit cards, student loans, car loans, things like that, personal loans. Um, Paying off a house, it takes a long time, so you don't necessarily have to sacrifice quite as much as you were, when you were trying to get out of the credit card debt. But make that a goal. Try to pay your house off in 10 years if it's possible. Even though today that might sound like craziness, um, it, 10 years is a long time. You'll be surprised by what you can actually accomplish in 10 years. And then the last one is to start investing in a discount brokerage outside of retirement. Um, so if you just think about like either your rent payment or your house payment, if you no longer had that, because it's generally a big, it's usually like 25% of your paycheck. If you no longer have that, think about how much money you could invest every month, because that is what really gets you to the financial freedom. So again, those are kind of the five pillars of money from my perspective. But again, when you're in a relationship, you've got to kind of think about that vision. That's one thing that I think we talked about this in the budget. If you just tell your partner or your significant other that, we're going to budget and this is why, they're probably going to say no thanks. But if you say, hey, this is where I want to get to, this is my vision of the future, they might be more open to, doing it with you. So it's all about how you approach the other person as well. And then just to sum that up, financial freedom is possible no matter where you are today. How it's never too late to start. Anything you can do today to kind of start turning your money around is a good thing. So don't feel like you can't do it because, again, as I mentioned, I'm not special. Um, I'm not like crazy smart or anything. I'm just pretty normal person, and I was able to do this. So I really feel like anyone can do this.
And so you mentioned the financial red flags, entering into relationships, not somebody not really being transparent. So you mentioned that as one. Is there anything else that you would advise others to look out for? And at what point, when should someone, what I mean, not necessarily looking at in regards to red flags, seek professional help financially?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, again, conversations. If you can't talk about money with your significant other without getting into an argument about it, that's a big red flag. You should be able to talk about it. And maybe you guys disagree on things. Like, I disagree sometimes on things, and that's okay. I mean, we're all human, we're all individuals. We can have disagreements, but it doesn't mean that we argue about it constantly. It's one disagreement and we decide how to move forward. And if you can't do that with your significant other, then it's time to talk to someone, definitely, because that's a big, big red flag.
All right. So closing out. So what are your some final personal, words of wisdom that you'd like to actually impart onto the listeners? viewers?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that I did, and I've seen this a lot, but it's really true. It's very helpful. Think about you, yourself, when you're like 80 or 90 years old, and you're literally at the end, and you've lived your life, and what is it that you wish you would have done? Because as I get older, I do become a little more fearless. For some reason, our teenage years and 20s, I just felt a lot, and I don't know if this is normal, but I just felt like very self conscious, And as time goes on, I feel a lot less self conscious. Um, at 80 years old, I don't, most older people don't necessarily, they're not self conscious, right? They've lived their life. Yeah. So think about yourself at that point in time, and what is it? Like, what is that one thing you wish you would have done? Um, where are you? Who are you with? And then you can kind of go backwards. Where are you at 60 years old? Where are you when you retire at 70, or are you 50? So if you kind of think about, like, we've got this great big life, and if every day we have, we get to make choices, and all those choices, sometimes we aren't even conscious of the choices we make, but all of those choices add up. Um, so if you start thinking of your life like as this bigger thing, and how you're actually impacting your life, your big life, every day by your choices. For me, that was kind of an eye opener. There were some things that I wanted to do in my life, but I just wasn't making progress. Like, I was kind of living this day to day thing, worried about my image, things like that. Whereas, like, I'm like, oh, if you like step back and look at the big picture, why do I care about this? So for me, that was a big thing, and it really helped me make decisions better, especially toward my money. I started understanding, like, what do I really value most in life, and how can I get to the life that I really want. That would be my advice for anyone. Just really become aware of what really, really matters to you versus these kind of like, I think you said, like, a veneer. You don't really care about this whole veneer that you're putting on. Yeah, it's not important in the long run.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that. And so, Cori, thank you. So, in regards to, so how can more people get to know about Cori Arnold, your book, Win with Your Money? I think that that's one of a few. Your views, wisdom, and how you're trying to leave your mark on the world. So, how can they find you?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, yeah. So my book is Win with Your Money. You can find it on Amazon. I've got a paperback and an audio book, as well as I think it's available on Audible as well. And then if you want to get in touch with me, I have winwithyourmoney.com is my website. Feel free to reach out. And lastly, my Twitter page, or my X page, sorry, that's my biggest page. So you can find me there at I am Cori Arnold.
Thank you a lot, Cori, for joining the podcast. Really appreciate you and the
Yeah, thank
information.
you so much, Brian. Thanks.